Before we talk about what happens now, what do you think the difference would have been if at the ANC's elective conference in December 2017, David Mabuse had not gone and voted with Ramaphosa? David Mabuse had not operated as Helen Zille was telling us a moment ago, for his own personal interest, for his own ambition. No. And he'd gone with Mrs. Zuma. Do you think the Zondo Commission would ever have happened?
I don't think so. And if it had have, it wouldn't have had its terms of reference broadened. And it would have become quite useless because the findings in the Zondo Commission can be used in the courts of law, and that was not in the initial terms of reference in the beginning when Jacob Zuma then went ahead. So he was under pressure. Even though the courts had set aside his attempt to ensure that or to try and get the report from Thuli Madonsela set aside, I don't think it would have had the power that it has right now. So without a doubt, he would have controlled the ANC in the background and its leadership, and it would have all been poo-pooed. It would have been a process that certainly wouldn't have gone, and given it the gravitas. And I think what we really needed was a strong commission and a strong set of findings that is going to take the country forward.
I'll tell you where I'm going here, Wayne. Okay, so there you are. You're the CEO of a major company. You then decide, no, to hell with it. I'm actually going to go and fight against these miscreants, these guys who are buggering up the country. And yet you knew all along the way that the odds were stacked against you.
Yeah.
It's almost like Helen's not without a fight kind of approach. Where's it in your head? I know you were born in Zim, but you also got a bit of the iron filings in the water in Newcastle, which helped you. But where did it come from? Where did this not without a fight part of you? Is it in the genes? Is it in the environment?
Look, Alec, you must remember at the time in 2012, well, it actually started a bit earlier when we started to see these gantries. As a business person, I was starting to get frustrated with government's influence on business without the necessary consultation. So when we heard overnight, literally driving to work one day, Nazir Ali coming on radio in 2010, just after the World Cup, I heard him responding to questions that were coming from the public. What are these things being built, these space-age gantries over the freeways? The roads had already been upgraded for the World Cup, just about to be finished. And he started explaining that this was the way we're going to get the money back from you. We built these lovely roads from you, but don't worry, you don't have to stop at the booms. It's all going to be electronic. You just stick this tag on your windscreen, put money in your bank account, we'll suck money out of that account, and the rest is so easy. This is technology, and you need to pay for these roads. And we were led to believe something totally different. But from a car rental perspective, this was a nightmare. This was going to impact the way we build our clients, because they couldn't give us the information live. So people fly off, tourists fly off. You've got to bill them later. It became massively problematic, and we set up a process, an engagement with Sanral to find out how did they arrive at this idea and this plan, and why hadn't they consulted. And from there, I just learned very quickly over the next year that this was born in sin. There was so much happening behind the scenes. This was a massive money-making scheme with an international company. Money was going to flow offshore. And I'd had my time. I'd had a lot of fun at Avis at the time. We'd become, sustainable and a service-oriented organizations, 5 years at that helm. And I felt that we needed to challenge this. The lawyers said this was a strong case, although we had come late. It was technically we could lose, but we needed to go and fight it. And we won the interdict, and that put a massive amount of wind in our sails. The public were angry. State capture was there, not known as state capture, and Kandla was headline news at the time. And I just felt that, look, it needs full-time attention. I couldn't be in the boardroom at Avis and attend to what we saw at the time. Media was big for this case for us. Social media was picking up. and this needed full-time attention. So I wanted to change. I thought it would be about 6 months before government came to its senses, and how wrong I was. And I thought they really would change their minds. I tried to go and see Praveen, eventually got an audience with him, and I could just see that they were blinded. And that, as Helen says, this was a scheme that was going to make the ANC a lot of money. And I think it still is, which is why it's not turned off. Even though it's not making the 300 million rand a month, only getting 60 million rand a month, it's not a fire hose of water, but it's maybe a garden hose. It's still a sweet stream of water that people are drinking from.
So is it a criminal enterprise, the ANC?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Helen's not exaggerating?
Not at all. Not at all. The amount of deals that are taking place, and if you just look everywhere with regards to tenders that are happening in local government, municipalities, provincial government, and at national, I would imagine that 80% of them have some cut or some deal, but certainly the vast majority where the ruling party has benefited. And as those taps have started to close over the last couple of years, you've seen the ANC go broke. Their revenue streams they're not completely turned off, but they start to dry up. People stop funding them because they're not as influential as they are. And then they can't pay their salaries, and you have this ruling party falling apart.
But still the key question here is, most business people, most corporate executives, let me not say business people because I think there's a very different world with entrepreneurs, but most corporate executives, faced with what you were faced with, would say, well, okay, I'm pretty marketable. I've had 5 years running Avis. Let me maybe go and run some other company. Why didn't that occur to you as a possible option?
Well, I wasn't really needing to move on from Avis. I was enjoying it, and Barloworld had just taken over. There were other opportunities coming. We'd introduced some really exciting stuff on the sustainability front, became the first carbon neutral company in the country, and it was good fun. So I guess I was in the space for change, possibly in the corporate space, but this issue of e-tolls came from the side, and it was so strong, and it had to be challenged. And I thought that once we won that court case, the interdict initially to stop it from launching, that part B of the case was the review of that decision, where the courts just found it too difficult. But before I get into that space, so I had to get involved in this, not knowing where it was going to go, not knowing that we were going to become a corruption-fighting entity in a broader sense later on. And why we did that was because we got enough funds, because we went out on a limb. We were broke, and Helen did give us a million rand at the time. We tried to keep politics out of it, but we needed funds to get to the Supreme Court to overturn the judgment that really said, look, the money had been borrowed, the roads had been built. So all of this is playing out, and unless somebody leads that charge and takes this seriously and takes the fight of a civil disobedience campaign to the government, and that's what it became, the biggest, in our new democracy, the biggest civil disobedience campaign. But the public look to somebody or some entity and say, well, what do we need to know about this? Convince us why we should participate in a civil disobedience campaign. And then what are you going to do to help us if they start coming after us? Because it's criminal records now, potentially. Your licenses can be withheld, blacklisting. This is a fearful space for citizens, middle-class South Africans, to go into if they don't pay the e-toll bills. And that's when we said, all right, we've got no money in the bank. We will defend every single individual. And this is Gilbert Marcus, who did a lot of the Group Areas Act fighting. He said, go down this road. Defend everyone until a judge rules in favor of you, and that becomes the precedent. And that's what they did with the pass laws. So we said, but how do we do that? And he said, just tell the public, you will defend them if there's money in the bank. Every one of them. So we did. That was the easiest thing to do. And then it was a case of, well, how do we make sure we get funds? Because up until then, the first 2-3 years, we'd put the word out. We need support. This court case has cost us a lot, and I want to talk a little bit about lawyers and watch when with their lips move. Don't believe a thing. If they tell you the case is going to cost you R1 million, it cost us 10 million, literally. So we'd run out of funds, and we needed the funds. And I think what I'd learned then from a couple of strategic discussions with some propeller heads is that do not allow people to give you one-off donations, because you can't fund this fight. You can't put the team together and the expertise you require on volunteers. You have to pay market-related salaries.
Just briefly tell us the size of the team now at OUTA.
It's 45 staff, and it costs 70% of our costs is salaries, because that's what this is all about, it's people power, and it costs us over R3 million a month to manage it.
So moving on to the next, where to now from Zondo's perspective? Are you going to align with the recommendations of the Zondo Commission, perhaps help, because we know the NPA needs help?
Yeah. So that's what I mean by where to now. When Cyril Ramaphosa came into power, it was a case of, great, now things are going to happen, and they didn't. And we realized that civil society has got a bigger role to play, and started to craft and change OUTA's focus areas into starting to hold people to account. So we said, well, if the NPA is not going to take people like Duvenage on, we're going to bring civil cases against them, and had to declare the delinquent director. And then we started to see how decimated the NPA is, and the ID. We had the Gupta leaks. They landed in our lap, very fortunately, within a month of them being surfaced. And we worked with propeller heads to put together an amazing search engine, and then started working with the NPA as Cyril's team had put Shamila Batoy in place, and we realized the capacity was bad. It was weakened. There were people still in the cabal within the NPA blocking, putting up barriers. And so we set up a team that worked full-time with them, giving them all the information they needed, because we could investigate without the political interference, and we could see things differently, and we had the funds initially to assist. So where to now is really to make sure that this document does not gather dust. Make sure that those recommendations happen, and fight for things like when Peter Becker is removed from the National Nuclear Regulator recently, the only civil society board member in one of these entities. We have to fight to get him back on board. We have to take people like Wedi Mantashe on. So where to now is really about building this, taking the organization into new spaces, not only to hold or make sure the state starts holding corrupt politicians to account, but how do we start fixing and making sure that society becomes part of the solution in government at local level, provincial level. And so we're starting to introduce applications that help reporting infrastructure breakdown, because municipalities don't put these apps together, or they all develop their own ones. They pay 20 million rand. Joburg's Roads Agency paid 20 million rand for their app. We've developed one for them for free for the entire country. Yes. So it's that type of stuff. And then setting up, we initially believed, Alec, that we could go into local government levels with our OUTA model, and we can't. We realized that after a year of trying to do so. All we're doing now is empowering communities to make sure that they understand their power, their rights at a local government level, and to start holding local government to account through a very structured process, a common process, a network process that'll hopefully improve the service delivery in all our municipalities.
Wayne, thanks for doing the work that you did on Zondo, because some dots were joined for me. Steinhoff inflated assets, borrowed money. It showed it was possible. In other words, it committed fraud, cooked the books, and the big banks around the world gave it money.
Yeah.
What you showed us today was it was a very similar strategy. It appears to have been in the SOEs. The books were cooked, assets were inflated, borrowings were sucked in, and then, of course, stolen, as happened with Steinhoff. So it's very interesting to see this replica between the two. Mm. But in the middle of all of this are the auditors. In the middle of all of this are the accountants, the guard dogs, who should have been watching.
Yeah.
I mean, what's your opinion? What's your thought on that? And how is that absolute cancer in society going to be addressed?
Well, it has to be, and that's where URBA comes in. And I said earlier on SICA as well. I mean, the South African Institute of Chartered Accountants. These are people playing important roles within businesses, looking away. URBA, the regulator for the auditors, they're not doing enough. And we got hold of URBA, and we've made laid a lot of complaints, by the way, with these entities, and put them under a lot of pressure. And seemingly, they don't seem to understand that they are oversight bodies that have power, that have a lot of power, but they're too scared to exercise it. So they get caught in this difficult space of trying to have to discipline their own. And they don't really want to go there. And that's why we like what Zondo has said. You have to go there. And suddenly now SICA is sitting up and saying, okay, well, and I mean, our complaint against Anush Singh was laid in 2017. And eventually they did something with him. But there's another hundreds Anush Singhs out there. And URBA has to start doing far more than what it's doing in holding the auditing houses to account. The auditing houses have to.
Thanks for opening eyes on that. And for those of you who don't know, a partner of Deloitte is sitting in the dock next to the Tongaat executives on that big fraud charge. So it is happening.